If you notice a change in my voice on this video, I have a weird kind of scratchiness in my throat that I got when I was out earlier, and it doesn't seem to be healing properly. And this is really the best time I have to record, so shit's my luck. Also, I wrote this script like in December, around late November or December. I was trying to get it out before Christmas. And that failed, obviously, and I had other things I needed to work on before getting to this one. The title might be a bit misleading because when I wrote this script back in the good old days of November 2025, we thought that Netflix was going to buy Warner Bros., which also wouldn't have been great, but better than Paramount. Then we found out Paramount might actually be buying them instead because that other deal fell through. The Ellisons have a lot of questionable political affiliations. Let's just leave it at that. And people are now afraid that this means the end of Gunn at DC because he's a lot more of an openly progressive person. Without going into too much detail on that, I don't believe this is the case. At the end of the day, they're businessmen, and it's bad for business for them to change this universe and reboot it like a third fucking time in however long. Regardless of that, this is not about the business stuff, behind the scenes stuff that's going on in Warner Bros. And the million different times they have changed hands. This is specifically about the creative decisions made in the handful of projects that Gunn has made at the time of this recording. So, yes, just letting that lie here and let's continue. DC's history with live action affair just fascinates me in a way that Marvel's really hasn't. It's because Marvel's entire trajectory is just a lot more neater, at least when Marvel Studios got involved. And I love mess. And DC's output has been receiving growing pains, not only with behind the scenes drama, but a studio crashing into a ravine in slow motion for nearly a decade. Now, we have a couple of projects under the new banner of the DCU or DC Universe, and all of these are under the production of Peter Safran, and more importantly for this video, James Gunn. I have some concerns. Before we get into that, the Gazan genocide has been going on for over 2 years now, over 2.5 years at this point, and shows no signs of slowing down. Linked below will be the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions campaign, and the Samir Project. Anything you can donate, anything you can do to try to help bring awareness to this, you would be surprised what will help in these situations. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I also want to bring up the Muslim Sisters of Era. They are a Dublin based voluntary group that was started by Muslim women who go out to help homeless people and give various different services. They are an extremely good cause. Unfortunately, they fell into a bit of strife recently during the fuel protests when they opened up in Dublin in their usual spot. They face some harassment. And of course, this is unacceptable. This is not fair. And I don't think they should have been put through that kind of harassment. No one should. So I'm going to give a shout out to them. The donation link will be down below. Please donate to them if you are able to. Thank you.
Hello, editing nearly a film critic here. Just popping in quickly because I have another emergency fundraiser I want to get eyes on. My friend Finn, who you probably better know as Swolsome, is organizing for his friends, the Al Ashab family. They are currently living in Gaza, and as you probably guess, they have suffered through the genocide for over 2 years now. They are attempting to escape and make a life in Egypt, and they need our support. Linked below will be a fundraiser that you are free to donate to if you're not able to, which is understandable. Please share the link and try to get the word out there. Every little you can do can help support these people. Thank you very much.
Back to the whole DC thing. A lot of these trepidations start with Zack Snyder. I promise I'll keep this brief. Kind of brief. Attempts to do a DC version of the MCU started just a few years after they started, even before the much hyped Avengers crossover, with Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern movie clearly meant to be a jumping off point. That didn't happen, shockingly.
Wow. I know, right?
So a few years later, we got a new attempt with Man of Steel. The movie's director Zack Snyder had a vision of 5 movies with spin-offs of all other characters that would lead into a unified whole that would have closed off his version of the DCEU, which I can't imagine, even if things didn't immediately hit fall, the studio would have let end that neatly. One thing to note about DCU is that it did start off with its own dedicated studio. You look at the MCU and Marvel Studios is there from the jump. All they do is make Marvel movies. But for a while now, this has been under the same division as well, any other Warner Bros. Movie being made. This changed after BVS underperformed and DC Studios came in, but it really indicates how badly prepped this whole thing is. The lack of plan, or more precisely, to stick to a plan being set out because they didn't get instant gratification, became a recurring theme here. The Man of Steel sequel was slated to be literally the film after Man of Steel because duh. But that was put on hold to fast track a Batman crossover. Snyder's plan was likely attractive because it allowed the studio to almost immediately get to a crossover territory, while they felt lagging behind Marvel, which even in a copy my homework but don't make it obvious kind of way, you can at least keep their smart ideas. Building up the characters and have them team up just makes so much more sense. Batman vs. Superman doing pretty good in box office returns, but not meeting Warner Bros. Expectation, was really the beginning of the end of Snyder's DCEU. While he stayed attached to Justice League, his constant fighting with the higher up clearly burnt him out. Tragically, Snyder's daughter took her own life, which caused him to exit the film during post-production, where Warner Bros. Brought Joss Whedon on board to essentially retool it into something they more wanted. There is so much more I could get into here, particularly as they appear to try to court Whedon into taking over the reins until other drama spurred by this movie caused that to fall apart. But holy shit, I'm 6 paragraphs in and I'm only at Justice League. I swear to you, this will be short. Kinda. I say this as someone who doesn't even like Snyder's movies. I thought he was a terrible fit for DC. He was fucked here. And it was all over Warner Bros. Greed and refusal to take a more deliberate path to $1 billion. I hope he's doing well over everything he went through. Seems like a nice guy. Have zero interest in those Rebel Moon movies. But yes, at this point, Snyder is gone. Him and his wife only get production credits on sequels to films they were involved with, like Wonder Woman and Suicide Squad. But DCEU was in a new direction. No direction. For the next 6 years, they just made a bunch of films with like the loosest possible connection to one another. And straight up, some of the best films they made were in this era. Shazam and Birds of Prey are up there with some of the best MCU. Yes, I will defend Birds of Prey. Fucking fight me. I really like that Blue Beetle movie. Probably came out 6 years too late. I really enjoyed it. But I mean, this was not really sustainable if they wanted something bigger with these characters. Enter James Gunn, freshly snagged up to work on the Suicide Squad after Disney fired him. Guess I'll address this quickly because people will bring it up if I don't. If those tweets turned you off the guy, I get it. I can't defend them. They were objectionable and crude. Even if I think he sincerely changed, he was in his goddamn 40s making these jokes, there's no excuse. It hasn't turned me off his work, but I'm not willing to go to bat for the guy over them. Anyway, one of the dumber consequences of these movies having no direction is that different projects just kind of had their own pocket teams within the DCU umbrella. So you had the Shazam team did their thing, the Wonder Woman gang did their thing, you get the gist. This led to one of the funnier and really sad events of Dwayne Johnson trying to muscle his way into DCEU dominance with Black Adam, a character they were developing into a movie for as long as the DCU has been around, with Johnson attached the whole way, and nobody remembers that fucking film. They try to get Henry Cavill to make a big return as Superman in a post-credit scene for his movie, only for this to fall on its ass about a month later, which plans with the DCU involved a brand new Superman. Just incredible dumbassery. Really feel bad for Cavill here as well. But yes, by the end of 2022, it was announced that James Gunn and Peter Safran were going to be in charge of the newly named DC Studios. While there was extreme confusion as to how the DCEU will fit, it became obvious as time went on that most of it would be ignored outside of certain ways it would be warped continuity-wise to fit this brand new universe. Before I go further, there's the case of this fandom debate about Snyderverse versus Gunn people online. I know this takes up a lot of bandwidth, so before going into my thoughts about the DCU so far, I need to make my stance on this as clear as possible. I don't care. Just to briefly go over these two, while ignoring that all corporations are sources of complete evil that must be eradicated, sees the means of film production, comrade, these choices made sense. I'm not going to deny that Kevin Feige is good at his job. He obviously is. But his strengths have always been in his knowledge of Marvel. He's not a creative, and even with their grand plan shit and when that actually worked, it made the MCU feel like factory line assembly slop, reliant more on good creatives to elevate that task. I think making it one person runs into the Doctor Who problem. Oh wow, shocker, I'm bringing up a Doctor Who comparison in this video. Aren't you amazed? Where the classic series was balanced between the producer and the script editor. These were combined into the head writer for the revival, and this meant if you're good at marketing and producing, you fall short on writing, and vice versa. Making it a two-header for the DCU makes a bit more sense, I feel. A brief note of Peter Safran, who won't be featured as heavily here compared to Gunn, but he's best known as a talent scout and shepherding a lot of James Wan's work, most specifically The Conjuring. So he's good at taking genre fare and spinning it into more marketable material. Gunn hardly needs an introduction. He's proven his moxie with superhero films over a decade now, and has a penchant for more out there and obscure elements and characters in both Marvel and DC. I think this is a good fit and will hopefully strive to distinguish them from the MCU. After the announcement, they released a video to explain how this is going to go forward. Promised a bunch of movies and show that will probably never see the light of day. In fact, one of these shows, The Authority, has already been paused indefinitely. And said actors will play themselves in animated forms as well as live action, keeping the same casting for continuity, which, gotta say, that's a good call. Also lying to us and saying The Flash is a great movie. With getting the last legs of the DCU out of the way in 2023, we're finally ready to start. 3 project films at the time of recording, all written by Gunn. So let's start with Creature Commandos, released late 2024, completing early 2025. The premise is, after Task Force X is discontinued at the end of Peacemaker, further proof that pre-DCU material will affect the DCU, Amanda Waller decides to start up a new Black Ops team called Task Force M, this time with imprisoned metahumans that resemble monsters, likely as the government will overlook them compared to other prisoners. Under the assignment of Rick Flag Sr., who will be relevant later, the team go to the fictional nation of Pakistan to defend Princess Rostovich from a terrorist attack by Wonder Woman villain Cersei. However, things are more complicated than they seem. I'm not going to bury the lead here. This is probably my least favorite of these 3. I'm kind of glad I left it till last to watch because the premise didn't do much for me to begin with. Minor nitpick, it's weird that Waller was even able to get this team off the ground given all the shit she was in at the end of Peacemaker. And you can't even argue that the switch over in universes retconned this. It's a plot point in season 2 of that show. She seems to be doing this behind the backs of everyone, but it's implied she has way more power and influence than she really should have. This isn't a massive problem I have with the show, it just bothers me personally. In case people get the wrong idea, there is stuff here I like. The characters are fun, as seems to be a case in the James Gunn joint about roguish underdogs. Bride is easy to stand out for me, but Dr. Phosphorus has a lot of fun banter. GI Robot gets one moment everyone loves, and yeah, it kicks ass.
Oh boy. Nazis.
I was invested enough in the plot, and while I do think the reveal at the end is rather obvious from the get-go, it fits thematically with the character struggles and overall worldview the series pushes. However, I feel it's that worldview where I run into pitfalls. This is the one show where I really feel Gunn's penchant for the sympathetic underdog lurches it over the table into mawkishness. The cast here have way too sympathetic backstories, and unlike the Suicide Squad, where it gave more pathos to terrible people wanting to do better, this removed a lot of the edge and nuance that made it hard for me to feel any sort of compelling stakes in the conflict. The bad guys here are the obviously bad, pretty ones, and the good guys are the outcast deemed monsters. The best example of this is Weasel. Now, Weasel is a joke character in the Suicide Squad where you're primed to not really feel bad about what happens to him because he murders several children. This has now been retconned as a big, woobified misunderstanding where reactions to his appearance caused events that got these children killed, which he tried to prevent. Whether this was Gunn's intent with this character the whole time or not, it does take the edge out of him and doesn't result in making him a more interesting character. Just another sad sack to the roster. And that's most of these characters. Each episode is paired with a flashback to the cast, and it's mostly just showing their utterly sympathetic and horrifying backstories. Now, this is a staple of Gunn, showing bad people had horrific origins and society's expectation is the real evil. But the only character who's allowed to be at least slightly morally grey is Phosphorus. His origin story is sympathetic, but it molded him to be a surly arsehole as well as a crime boss. His episode has one of the more affectionate emotional beats in the series by my estimation. At least in the final episode where, spoilers, Nina gets killed after showing us her life being utterly abused and cast out, up to and including this point. Outside of this really blunt fridging, it just feels like it went out of its way to make her life depressing just to make make the point that, well, the pretty princess is the real evil, and used her looks and social power to get that way. It felt inauthentic, it felt unearned, and it really soured me on the rest of the show. I also feel the structure of this is a bit too much like the film. Like Peacemaker, even following a clear end of the world plot, it felt more like an episodic structure where it led into a larger serialized story. This feels like it started off as a film that grafted the flashbacks on later. I don't think it did start life as a film, to be clear, but that's how it feels when I'm watching it, and it kind of made it not feel like it's about building the team instead of completing this larger story. I know how negative I sound here, but I swear I didn't hate this show, and there's a lot I liked. It's just I don't think the sum of its parts gave a satisfying whole. At the end of the day, the band of misfits cast out by society and all this political intrigue was done better by Gunn in the Suicide Squad. And this really didn't feel like he was exploring new territory by just making them all monsters. Harbor Innocent, though, his Frankenstein is a massive highlight. Hell, let's give the Homunculi to cast their own show and just forget about the rest. That's what I have for Creature Commandos. Fun in parts, but ultimately disappointing show. Thankfully, I'm much more positive on the next one. Superman is good. It's really good. Out of the three gun projects I'm looking at, it's what I liked the most, and by proxy, I have the least amount of issues with. That's not to say I have no issues, of course. First of all, like I said in my last video, it's very clearly an Israel-Palestine stand-in. Gun, don't be a coward, admit it. Even if the president doesn't really match Netanyahu, but he sure the fuck doesn't match Putin either. The biggest theme here is Superman finding his place as an immigrant to this planet and figuring out what that means after finding out his birth parents did not have the greatest of intentions when sending him to Earth. My thoughts on this plot point are mixed. And it feels like the most muddled, despite being one of the most important elements of the film. What makes Clark stand out is his humanity. Despite being an alien, he is connected with his place on this Earth. This is contrasted to Lex, who feels he is utterly above humanity, while paradoxically seeing Superman and other metahumans to a lesser extent as a threat. Clark redefining what being human and being a part of the people means is really important to solidify this contrast. I just don't know if making the immigrant's family who want to start mass breeding and forcibly remove those who question his authority, and him being one of the good ones who integrates perfectly because, hey, he grew up here, right? Is the best move. He feels no resentment to Earth or even connection to his own people. He's right at home here. Need to stress here, I don't think this is an intentional choice by Gunn. It feels like a rather unfortunate reach based on how the narrative plays out. I am willing to give him the benefit of the doubt here. This is also pushing the importance of adoption and defining how the Kents make Superman who he is. His talk with Pa is one of the most effective emotional beats in this film. I wish they were in the movie more to really help define this, but another issue would be how crowded this flick is. I'll get into that soon, but let me stay here and now this plot choice has some awkward optics and feels a little muddled. My hope is if the Kryptonians continue to appear like in Supergirl, it will mitigate the idea that they're some authoritarian conquering race. But it doesn't help the bad implications of this movie. It's simply good to say that someone should not be defined by choices and beliefs their parents had. Clark should be defined by his choices and his capability of humanity. This is good stuff to take away from that, and if you did, especially if you are an immigrant, that's great. It's a bit muddled for me, but my perspective doesn't really matter as much here. It does make me wonder what's being planned on the long term. So yeah, speaking of, this movie has the Justice Gang. I love Mr. Terrific, one of the breakout characters, and Idai Kategi is cooler than cool here. I feel this film is overstuffed and it could be removed. As mentioned, some elements like the Kents need better fleshing out, and a lot of these themes seem to be here for world building to a larger DCU that's strictly helping this film. Also, Rick Flag Sr. is here. Just worth noting, I think. We'd lose that cool ass action scene with Mr. Terrific, but sacrifices need to be made for the flow of the story. Anything else I have a problem with? Honestly, not majorly, and even then, you can make great arguments that I'm just wrong about the Superman's parents stuff. I love Crypto, the acting is great, especially from Cornsweat, Brosnahan, Holt Kategi, and Taylor Vince. It's extremely well shot, it flows and feels like a Superman adventure you'd get in the comics. Like, that's another thing with this being an introduction, it doesn't feel like an origin movie, and really helps the flow and balance without entirely feeling like we need that context. I mean, he's been around for 90 years nearly, we know how the beats go. This is specifically outlining problems I have, but I don't want to fall into this toxic negativity spiral that permeates the internet. This movie is good, and you are right to like it. Moving on to our final project we will be discussing here. Peacemaker picks up pretty much where season 1 left off, minus the reality warping changes that need to be made to coalesce the DCU with the DCU. It essentially has most of our cast at a low, particularly Chris Peacemaker, as he tries to figure out what his identity is as a fully free man on the path of rehabilitation. This season is good until it isn't, with the last 2 episodes feeling really deflated for me. A lot of issues here are pacing. It's clear here that the emotional and narrative crux is Chris going to the alternate timeline where he's a hero, but it takes too long and the twist takes too long to drop that we don't really have a satisfying payoff with it. The issue here is there's a lot of padding and a lot of characters to juggle. On top of the 11th Street gang, we have the new Argus agents led by Rick Singer, hey, remember him? As well as the alternate universe version of Augie and Keith. Now, this may not seem as many more as season 1 had, but the focus there was a lot tighter with everything funneled through the butterfly plot, with the White Dragons being more of an emotional arc for Chris that bubbles to the surface. The Argus and Earth X stuff is almost entirely separate and more focus given to the former because they're the ones in the main reality. And I'm sorry, they're really dull. Some of the characters are fun. Tim Meadows is always a treat.
Bird blindness. It's my sole weakness.
But they feel like a minor distraction rather than what ends up being the main threat of the season. Flag's motivation being that Chris killed his son is totally reasonable, but his character is just made into a super straightforward, manipulative douchebag, which gets worse as the season goes on. Also, the Michael Rooker subplot is really silly and funny in places. I'm not wild about the appropriation, I don't care if the lampshade it, but it's so utterly superfluous and takes up so much time that I'm wondering if it's here only because Gunn really wanted Rooker to do something stupid on screen. This also means some of the characters get lost in the shuffle. Vigilante, after being a standout last season, is just shuffled into the quirky, random comedy sidekick for most of this. There's a surprising emotional beat after Chris leaves, but that doesn't really go anywhere. Nowhere is this more apparent than Keith, who could have been a fascinating villain and has some great moments early on, but by the time we get to those last 2 episodes, he feels like he's left out to dry, and we end with him on a sort of cliffhanger, which is wild because there's no guarantee we're getting a season 3. I was willing to see this out with the vibe and the pace until those last 2 episodes. It really feels like they crammed 5 episodes worth of story into 2. Maybe this idea was too ambitious for 8 episodes, but I really feel like they could have just paced it better. Don't mind the reveal that Augie is a better person in this universe, only for him to immediately get killed being so late on. Honestly, one of the more effective beats, and it leads into that amazing breakdown from Cena. I just think they could have had the Nazi reveal earlier, maybe have Chris leave around episode 3 and give some room to breathe. It'd have been way more of a wall. Also, I think ads should have been a bit more pissed off with Chris for leading them into a Nazi world, even if he wasn't aware that's what it was, but whatever. Again, I need to stress, in a video where I'm talking about issues I have in stuff I ultimately like. There's a lot of good here. I love Chris's arc. I love the conclusion it comes to. I love that the finale isn't some big blowout fight. It's as in the other trying to save Chris from himself. His relationship with Hardcore is really well handled and develops in a way that feels extremely in character for both. Like, the cast is still very strong here and get through some issues I have with the writing. It's also just really fucking funny. I can almost get over a lot of the pitfalls with the writing because the final episode is so emotionally cathartic if it wasn't for the stuff setting up Salvation Run, especially the ending. What a weird sour note to end everything on. Literally feels like a post-credit singer. Maybe they wanted that beat because Flag's arc feels lacking otherwise, but it just seems there to set up the broader DCU shit rather than an appropriate ending for this season.
Hi, editing nerdy film critic butting in again. So, watching over this, I probably didn't make it too clear about my issues with the last 2 episodes while also praising the final episode for being so emotional of this show. I just want to make it clear that just because I think the emotional arc is strong here in these final episode and like performances are great and it really comes to somewhat of a satisfying conclusion in this regard. I think the story overall is still fairly messy and rushed, and I think even though these are strong elements, a more satisfying overall whole would be better than what we get with the sum of its parts, being that the final episode has some decent moments and writing in it, and even in not all the stuff. I'm not wild about the setup for the Salvation Run stuff, just some interesting elements there. Again, it just feels very muddled. I'm more pointing out my concerns here, and I think this could have been more tightly written than how it comes out. And I think if they had more time to flesh this out, this ending, which I do like in some parts, could have gone from good to amazing, as strong as that first season was. It isn't as it stands, and that's very disappointing. So I hope this is clearer than how I initially did in my recording and my scripting, and let's move on to conclusion.
Want to say for the billionth time, this is some good shit. I have issues with Creature Commandos, but I ultimately enjoyed it. I really dug Superman, and Peacemaker is really strong outside of some pacing issues, and the ending is all over the place. This isn't breaking all these down individually, this is just little patterns I'm noticing, and fears about how shared universes can sometimes supersede everything. One of the easier ways to resolve this is, of course, getting James Gunn off writing duties for all of these. Not that he can't write anything, it's just 3 projects in a row. I can understand why some of these feel a little underbaked. A little directly hitting notes he's already done. A little like he didn't really have time to draft them as completely as when he was working on one film apiece for Marvel, or even the first season of Peacemaker. Already, this seems to have been resolved. The next projects scheduled for release are Supergirl, Lanterns, and Clayface. None of them are being written or directed by Gunn. Good. I can't imagine he wants to hawk so much spotlight, and he doesn't want to stretch himself that thin anyway. It looks like he's only working on Man of Tomorrow for now, and I think one thing at a time is best, if he's also going to be co-running this whole studio. Another thing is Rick Flag Sr. being such a recurring presence. He feels like a different character in each project, and it's weird because Gunn wrote all of them. He's barely in Superman, but they just make him this gruff follow orders type, which he seemed somewhat more empathetic before. This doubles down in Peacemaker, and while his single-mindedness against Chris makes sense in how he lets Lex manipulate him, this doesn't really consider he saw through all of his shit in Superman long before he's outed as a traitor. Like, these are all wildly different scenarios for Rick, and maybe they bring out different sides of him, but I don't get at all who he's supposed to be. Is he the suave, womanizing, debonair type, a conscientious but otherwise loyal government lackey, or a single-minded obsessive who will utilize the power in his hands to get what he wants? If we're getting recurring characters who work within a narrative like this, they need to be more coherently written. Aside from this, the fact that a lot of Rossovic's plan is relying on how easy it is to play this horny idiot, it's so stupid, and depends on way too many factors to not make that finale feel like an asshole. This isn't just a video bitching about Creature Commandos moving on. Pacing's all over the place too. Now, I never really felt that this was Gunn's strongest suit as a creative. Even his stuff I love can feel flabby or not know when to quit when it's ahead, but it feels particularly bouncing all over the place here. When you bring pacing up, people always conflate it with runtime, which I always feel is dumb. For me, it's more how well a story is told, what time it has, and if it uses that time well. A 4-hour film could fly faster than an 80-minute one if it's paced well. Peacemaker is easily the worst offender here, but I feel that as well with Superman, where the stuff needs to breathe a tad bit more. Funny enough, that interview scene is probably some of the best pacing in a superhero film I've seen in a long time, but I digress. Creature Commandos has that problem I mentioned where it feels like a film crammed into a television show with a flashback conceit. This may just be a Gunn issue and that's something overall with DCU, so we'll see. This could be a consequence of my biggest issue, however, and that's how much the world building is already hard leading and setting up storylines that may not play out for ages. The bloat of stuff being set up and characters introduced would absolutely be a pacing killer. Doing universe building in a franchise like this is perfectly reasonable, but not if it gets in the way of storytelling. It feels like it has here in a microcosm, like the Justice Gang stuff in Superman and the Salvation Run stuff in Peacemaker. And I mean, there is continuity stuff I like. Rick Flag recovering at the beginning of Peacemaker over his fight with Clayface and Creature Commandos, which actually could explain his personality change, just probably better ways to implement this. This is just something that could balloon into a bigger issue. There, my issues with the DCU that I feel could be worrying if they're not resolved. They probably already are. I won't know until I see more of the stuff. Still on board here, but I hope this doesn't succumb to a bloated mess. Now, you may be asking, what are my thoughts on the MCU and where they're at now?
Next time, baby.